Hi, this is Damien AtHope, and I am an axiological atheist, which can simply be understood as a value theory or a value science atheist. And this video will basically be slides of my art that demonstrate the evolution from superstition to religion, or around 1 million years ago to around 5,000 years ago. I'm against all religion. And here are three harmful things common in all religions: pseudoscience, pseudo-history, and pseudo-morality. What makes some believe truth is actually true. To me, truth in general is a value judgment we place on what we think or believe is evidence or reason. Therefore, the rational imperative on us as intellectually honest thinkers is to demonstrate that the proposed evidence or reasoned assumption is actually of a high standard, with as much valid and reliable reason and evidence as possible, from a credible source as possible, which then makes some believe truth actually worthy to be seen as epistemologically true. Thus, a justified, true belief. Do you have such justification? By claiming to know something by faith is to act in a way mirroring a dishonest thinker, as intellectually honest thinkers don't claim knowledge without justification. My goal against religion is to fully stop force indoctrination, as well as help debunk the belief in religions and all magic claims, because they are not justified. So, starting with superstition, we need to understand that it's not limited to humans. There are chimpanzee rituals seen with sacralizing of shrine trees. 3.4 million years ago, there are bones with cut marks made with stone tools in Ethiopia. By 3.3 million years ago, there are stone tools that are found in Kenya, East Africa, in the beginning of the Stone Age. And the progression goes from the 3.3 million years ago, very crude stone tools, to a little bit more advanced stone tools by 2.6 million years ago, to an even more advanced set of stone tools that starts around 1.76 million years ago until about 130,000 years ago. And this last pear-shaped hand axes associated with Homo erectus are designed in a way beyond just utilitarian use and start to demonstrate symbolic thinking. And even in this progression of symbolic thinking, the stone tools start relatively large in general, and then start to move to a lot smaller and more defined use. And then they shift again and become even smaller and more refined, and there is a larger variety of use being done by the tools. And often tools are sharpened and reused. So the stone tools, even the ones that start at the more advanced and the 1.76 million years ago to 130,000 years ago, you can see that there's a progress from being very crude even to a more refined and more uniform shape. Now, to me, this also demonstrates a progression in the more symbolic thinking. 1.5 million years ago, there's the use of fire, and probably the beginning or close to the beginning of fire sacralization or worship, certainly by 300,000 years ago. This is also in Kenya. So superstitions begins about 1,000,000 years ago to pre-Animism, certainly emerging by about 300,000 years ago or more. And then Animism Religion begins about 100,000 years ago. Proto-superstition 1,000,000 years ago. Primal superstition about 1,000,000 years. Proto-superstition around 600,000 years ago. Progressed superstition around 300,000 years ago when it becomes pre-Animism. Primal religion, Animism, is around 100,000 years ago. Proto-religion, early Animism, around 75,000 years ago. Progressed religion, Totemism, around 50,000 years ago to 30,000 years ago with Shamanism. Primal superstition, Homo erectus, at 1,000,000 years ago, not only was using fire, but using fire for cooking. Likely butchering animals that were already dead or injured in some way. Pre-Animism portable rock art figure stones. I think they probably represent something close to our idea of gravestones. But they could have had other use, but definitely another progression and symbolizing of the stones beyond just utilitarian use. Homo erectus invented modern living about 750,000 years ago with evidence in Israel, and it shows that they built hut structures. 500,000 years ago also. And 400,000 years ago, there's evidence of 12 huts in France. This could have been made by Homo erectus, Homo heidelbergus, or even early Neanderthal. 350,000 years ago in East Germany, likely also Homo erectus, or it could have been one of the other variations. And these huts at the 350,000 years ago seem to be quite similar to those the Bushmen of South Africa use. Progressed superstition, 430,000 years ago, a pit of bones in Spain, seeming evidence of intentional storing of bones or bodies of 28 individuals in a chamber pit. And placed on top was a reddish stone, red symbolizing probably blood of life or blood of death. Maybe even afterlife thinking at this time. Pre-Animism portable rock art at least 300,000 years ago, although it's somewhere closer to the starting of 500,000 years ago possibly. And it involves the symbolic using of stones to make what seem to be relatively anthropomorphic human-like shapes, especially the face and also the woman's breast. 350,000 years ago, the emergence of prototype humans, and from Morocco. And these are possibly the oldest lineage for Homo sapien. Understanding religion evolution, animism, totemism, shamanism, paganism, and progressed organized religion. Pre-Animism is at least 300,000. Animism is 100,000. Totemism is 50,000. Shamanism is 30,000. Paganism is 12,000. And progressed organized religion is 5,000 years ago. Pre-Animism is a belief that is at least 300,000 years ago, involving mainly the idea of some sort of a spirit life or afterlife, and the use mainly of stones as figures. Pre-Animism's emergence, though, is no accident. At least by 300,000 years ago, you see the evolution of the brain is quite similar to that even of 100,000 years ago. And the 300,000-year-old Moroccan North African skulls look shockingly like modern human skulls. And they hold a mosaic of features. And there's also 300,000 years ago, there's a wolf tooth pendant showing the symbolic use and meaning of items. The history of inbreeding. Modern humans, Denisovans, and Neanderthals all interbred with each other on multiple occasions in the last 100,000 years. Homo naledi, an intentional cemetery, is evidence to me of Pre-Animism, and it dates around 250,000 years ago. 200,000 years ago in North Africa, there are shell beads that probably were for a necklace, showing symbolic meaning. Neanderthals diverged from archaic humans around 500,000 years ago, with several likely occurrences of inbreeding. Evidence is found in the DNA of Neanderthals and of humans. Neanderthals' primal religion, Pre-Animism, maybe even Animism. Mystery cave rings of 175,000 years ago, possibly like a chapel or sacred space. Neanderthal animism, totemism even, is seen in the stone tools of mount steering and flint tool association. And this also was then transferred to humans, modern humans in North Africa and West Asia, especially in Israel. And it shows that they were using talons as some form of necklace or some sort of thing to hang onto something, because they have perforated holes. And this technology was 160,000 years ago to 40,000 years ago. Neanderthals are also the first to do intentional burial, and they may have done it as far back as 250,000, but for sure 130,000 is the earliest undisputed evidence of intentional burial by Neanderthal. There was a total of 876 single Neanderthal fossil remains found in Corsica. Northern Israel, there was found a female Neanderthal burial 120,000 years ago. Did Neanderthals teach us primal religion, or at least some concept of burial and maybe thoughts of an afterlife, as seen in the burials in Israel that have association to both Neanderthal style and early modern human style? Animism is approximately 100,000 years ago, or years old belief system, and the thought of a spirit-filled life and afterlife, meaning that things can have a spirit nature. Primal religion, animism, 100,000 years old belief system. In Israel, there is early modern human remains, and these are dated somewhere for around 100,000 to 80,000 years ago. In early animism in South Africa, 100,000 to 74,000 years ago. And it seems to be that they were using stone tools and vegetation in the area for 100,000 years ago. And then 74,000 years ago in Border Cave is the burial of a 4 to 6 month old child found in a pit with a personal ornament, a perforated conch shell. Symbolic meaning. Early beginning of animism in Africa around 100,000 years ago till 73,000 years ago. There are pieces of red ochre that are found with symbolic hatch marks and carvings. 77,000 years ago in Bablos Cave, South Africa, there are 49 intentionally perforated shells. They're found in clusters of 2 to 17 with similar wear patterns, seeming to mean they were beads, and they're found to have red ochre covering them, showing a symbolic nature to it. There's a mask that is found in France and made of a stone with a piece of wedged animal bone in a hole that was made to make the likeness of some kind of a face. And this is 75,600 years old, and it's probably from Neanderthals, early Animism or Totemism. Was it just us at the origin of the modern mind 75,000 years ago? Nope. You can even see from the shapes of the head, Neanderthals actually had a little bit larger brain than modern humans. Crystal stones were made as art and possibly had ritual nature by Neanderthals, 75,000-year-old sacred stones. These stones were made and chipped to be very elegant, and yet were never used. A single origin model of where all modern humans originate fits the data very well in association with the emergence of modern humans out of South Africa. Somewhere around 100,000 to 50,000 years ago, they spread out from there. 75,000 to 70,000 year old stone snake worshipped in Rhino Cave in South Africa. First evidence of worship. 74,000 years ago, Border Cave, South Africa, that burial of the 4 to 6 month old child was found to have several personal ornaments listed here. Did Neanderthals help inspire totemism? Because art dating to around 65,000 years ago in Spain of various types and features, some with animals or humanoid-like figures, seeming to express not just cave art but symbolic meaning, even possibly ritual meaning. 65,000 years ago, you can start to see that this is from Kenya, some of the oldest beads, and they have nature to them of the being ground in a way that they're starting to be very uniform, which seems to point to a modernist type of behavioral complexity and new symbolization. 60,000 years ago, fragments of engraved ostrich shell from South Africa. And these seem to have some sort of a engraving that would lead to be a personal ornament or family or clan or group expression, possibly even ritualistically or religious. Totemism, approximately 50,000-year-old belief system. It's like Animism in the sense that it is a spirit life and afterlife, spirit-filled life and afterlife, but also the belief that the making of totems represents something in this area. Progressed religion. From 50,000 years ago, there seems to be a transition from that earlier stages to where now there's a higher preponderance of burials, and now with grave goods. Neanderthal cave bear hunting starts at least 50,000 years ago, and also seems to coincide with possible bear cults. Desovian totemism, 50,000 years ago. There is headdress type of a tiara or something made out of mammoth ivory, and it hints to the complexity of their technology. Also possibly an expression of family, clan, or tribe, and could also be a form of religion connotation. Around 50,000 to 40,000 years ago seems to be also the origin of norm violations, relating to how we think of totemistic cultural influence of behavior, such as taboos, the beliefs that you can do and cannot do certain things. Genetics shows that after 40,000 years ago, there's extreme lowering of incest behaviors, which seems to coincide with this more complex things like figurines and cave art, also the increasing of personal adornments. Neanderthal totemism is seen in not just the continuation of the perforated talons, but also other items were made into personal adornments and possibly had a religious nature. Paleolithic jewelry made out of ostrich shell began to be seen 50,000 to 45,000 years ago in the Sovian cave, where they found the first Sovian, and also there was a place where there was a 90,000-year-old half Neanderthal, half Desovian female, showing that there was inbreeding with the Neanderthals and the Desovians, not just with the humans. The agrarian organization, European culture from 46 to 35,000 years ago. It was highly advanced and probably practiced some form of totemism. Skulls from 45,000 years ago or Neanderthal show modification, like seen later in things like Peru and whatever, where they modified the skulls. And it's not a one-off. There actually is at least 2 skulls that exhibit this type of cranial deformation, intentional, like skull binding. Would have to have been done with the infants. And mammoth dwellings made first by Neanderthal, then followed by modern humans, start 44,000 years ago and last up to 14,000 years ago. Likely a kind of a cultist culture, possibly totemism, and some sort of a religious symbolic meanings attached to them. These stars show areas where there is rock art sites. Most of them are in Europe, especially in France and Spain, and then merge out from there. And they're generally about 40,000 to 11,500 years old. 43,000 years ago is rock art, or possibly Proto organization culture, or possibly it could be Neanderthals or modern humans. And it depicts probably sea lions. And they seem to be in movement, possibly have a symbolic meaning in Spain. 43,000 years ago, pendant recovered from Russia. And it has lines on it, and possibly the lines could be either tally marks or relate to things like the stars. Organization culture art dating around 43,000 to 35,000 years ago, sort of a totemistic art, and in front of things like in France, Germany, Romania, Italy. 43,000 years ago, organization figure marks like these found in German cave show they're not just making the actual art that represents the animals, but adding marks to the animals that have a symbolic nature or meaning, like the crosses, hatches, and the lines. Ornament from Turkey, 41,000 to 43,000 years ago. A talon with a raptor with a notch mark symbolizing it was hanging or some sort of a necklace or something. There are at least 40,800-year-old dots in a cave in Spain, and it's probably around the time of the Proto-Agrarian culture. I think it could be referencing stars like the sun in the day and stars and moon at night. So it certainly probably relates to celestial bodies, which also, I think relates to ancestors and spirit animals. Certainly after 12,000 years ago, it could also relate to deities. This is an artifact. It's at least 40,000 to possibly 70,000 years old. And it is a bracelet that's highly polished and designed with a hole in it, possibly to hang something. And since it's so fine, it probably was a very special item and then had a very ritualistic use, not just regular, normal jewelry. At least 40,000 years ago, there's paintings in Indonesian caves. Totemism in Indonesia, 40,000 to 22,000 years old, with things like the rock art and also things like personal ornaments made from ritualistic animals. Around 40,000 to 35,000 years ago, there's pieces of Neanderthal ornaments and tools that are very fine, made out of bone. Early organization Totemism, 40,000 years ago, the lion figure. "38,000 years ago, engravings and pointillism, seeming totemism expression of different animals." And I think that the dots or the pointillism has to do with ancestors and the totem animals themselves and the stars. This right here is an organization from 43,000 to possibly 30,000 years old, and it probably represents phases of the moon or stars, and the one side and the other side of the little plaque is probably some sort of a humanoid figure like the lion figure, and has, again, lines on its arms representing something else, probably the celestial bodies or spirits like stars. Totemistic hunting cult, around 37,500 to 32,500-year-old bison skull. Totemistic cave art from France, and it's from 37,000 to 35,000 years old during the organization period, and could have the, in a sense, origin for the later goddesses, the below earth and the sky bull above. Ritualistic Paleolithic phallic art and genital scarification, piercing, and tattoos. The oldest is 36,000 years ago from France, and then 30,000 years ago from France has dots on it, probably again about the stars and ancestors. And similar in France, a 14,000-year-old phallus on the other end, on the right, has again more dots and probably represents the sacred nature of ancestors and stars. 30,000 years ago in Russia, early totemistic shamanism. And this site also has a horse with the pointillism dots again that probably represent the stars or the spirit nature, and also the people buried have lots of beads, little tiny beads on them, and those beads again to me probably represent a ritual nature connection to ancestors and the stars. 35,000 years ago in Italy is a figure that looks like a dancing female shaman with horns on her head and something like an antler or something in her hand. And then 25,000 years ago in France, there is a figure holding a horn, and she the horn seems to have several lines on it, possibly relating to menstrual cycles or periods of the moon. And then also in France, there's another at the same place, another figure, female, holding a horn. 34,000 years ago is the oldest lunar calendar, and it speaks of humans' awareness of the stars and heavens, and to me connects to ancestors and fertility cults. But also the ones of star patterns and swirling things from 23,000 to 19,000 years old, and then 18,000 to 16,000 years old. Probably stages the moon or the sun, maybe even shows an eclipse or something. And then 8,000 years ago, there's a bone with natch marks that probably relate to the same thing. Stars as ancestors, spirit animals, deities, at least by around 6,000 years ago, connects to shamanism that goes back to 30,000 years ago, and possibly even further back, 40,000 years ago, with Totemism. 31,000 to 25,000 years ago in the Czech Republic is Totemistic shamanism. There's ceramic, the oldest ceramic figure, and it is 27,000 to 25,000 years old. There's also a cultic triple burial with the one person in the hand is in the crotch area of another, the one in the middle. All their heads have red ochre put on top of them, and one of the people on the right side is actually facing downward. And then on the left side is a burial of a female shaman, and above her is a ivory portrait, probably expressing this type of a totem of her. The oldest ritualistic shaman burial, and it involves a 40-year-old woman dated 27 to 25,000 years ago, Czech Republic. She is also holding a parts of a Arctic fox, and she's bound tightly, possibly even relating to defleshing. And also there is a symbolic mammoth bones put on top of her with some sort of a early symbols placed on one of the ends. Figure stones in France from about 30,000 years ago seem to express possibly even a bear cult. 30,000 years ago, the belief of shamanism probably emerged. Sky barrels, possible origins at least 12,000 years ago, but more likely 30,000 years ago or older. Sky barrel animal worship mixed with ancestor worship is a funerary practice which a human corpse is placed on a mountaintop, elevated ground, tree, constructed perch, and then is scavenged by animals, mainly especially birds. 32 sacred cave art pre-writing shapes dated 35,000 to 13,000 years ago show a symbolic connection of human migration and symbolic ideas. 24,000 years ago is a burial of a female, probably a shaman, and again with the beads cap and beads around her, possibly relating to stars. And the Marabut culture of Siberia, if female human figures are common, some of them seem to be wearing clothing, probably relating to ancestors. And here's another one that shows the symbolic use of the dots, and the other side is snakes. And then the birds actually probably were worn on clothing by a shaman. This is a scene that is about 17,000 years ago from the Magdalenian culture from France, and probably depicts some sort of a life, death, and reincarnation. The head of the bird and the head of the man is the same, and so there's association of that, and the feet as well as the penis represent the horns of the bull. Magdalenian sacred ritual and symbols are seen in a burial of a shaman, female, and these symbols are like a necklace that probably had a sacred meaning. The Iron Gates region in the Balkans has the sitting position, possibly around 15,200 to 7,900. And then the Danube script, which comes out of the same area, with sacred ritual meanings, is about 7,500 to 5,500 years old. Goddess archetype ancestor shapes relating to three realms, the phases of the moon, the waxing, full, and waning moon, as well as representing heaven, earth, and underworld. Possible clan leadership, special male ancestor totem poles begin somewhere around 13,500 to 11,600 years ago. And they seem to have a connection to the emergence of the clan leader in power, as well as totem poles and telling of ancestors. 12,000 years ago, approximately, is the emergence of paganism. And Göbekli Tepe is the first human-made temple around 12,000 years ago. And it has many of those totem pole and ancestor type elements to it, as well as the possibly skull cult and sky burial. Ritualistic bird symbolism at Göbekli Tepe is ancestor cult, a sacred sky burial relationship between birds, spirits of the dead. Neolithic paganistic rituals at Göbekli Tepe and beyond, symbolic skull cult with stone head removal and symbolic ritual masks. The pre-pottery Neolithic skull cult, ancestor cult sites in the Levant, predominantly in Israel though, show a connection, and they start in Turkey, as I said, at Göbekli Tepe. The skull cult is basically 11,500 to about 8,000 years ago. And sitting Venus figure phenomenon, 11,500 to 5,500 years ago, all seem to be in a relatively small area with a connection. To me, Semitism and agricultural revolution beginning about 12,000 years ago, lasting until about 4,000 years ago when it became a general norm, is involved in the creation of goddesses around 12,000 years ago, as well as male gods sometime around or after 7,000 years ago. Iron Gates region, the same place where close to where the sitting figures in the Danube script is also figure stones of 11,500 to about 8,000 years ago. There was an emergence of agriculture that started in Asia through Turkey and then went into the Balkans and into the rest of Europe. This is Çatalhöyük, or the first religious design city, around 9,500 years ago to 7,700 years ago, with symbolism worship of the bull, of bears, of goddesses, of leopards. Also, at Çatalhöyük is 9,000 to 8,000 year old vulture wall art, and they seem to represent sky burial behavior. And then there's another one here where there's a bull head, and then below it looks like female breasts, and inside of these breasts in the wall are actually vulture heads. And then there's a bunch of burials that seem to match the wall art, and the fact that they're tightly bound, which would mean they're probably defleshed, and a few of them are missing their skulls, as the ones in the depicted pictures. Çatalhöyük, Turkey, first religious design city, also to me has three figurines with missing heads, like the skull cult removing the head, and also the fact that it matches the sky burial images. And these three figures, I think, are three different positions or times in a female shaman's life, starting as a young child and then a young adult and then adult. Çatalhöyük, a religious city, has what I believe the figurines represent are goddesses, demi-goddesses, grandmother, mother, ancestor spirits, fetishes for protection and ritual. Many of them are missing heads as well. These are a few proposed male figurines from Çatalhöyük, although I think that these first four are absolutely not male and probably female, and possibly these last two, but certainly this last one is an actual male figure. And that last male figure has another similar sitting male figure, is possibly relates to a special clan burial, and I think the sitting position here could represent the actual sitting position that this adult male found with the special knife was found. And the hats that both these are wearing, these leopard hats, seem to be like a leopard crown and seen on wall art from some of the lowest levels of the Çatalhöyük. And Çatalhöyük has hunting scenes, but these are not just normal hunting scenes. They seem to also have a sort of a ritualistic nature to them, like pulling on the tails of the animals, and here pulling on the tongue. And then also, you can see here there's a female or goddess with all the men who are hunting. This one's not hunting. 9,000-year-old masks are found in the Judean desert and hills. 12 stone-cut masks are found in various areas, and probably relate to the skull cult and ancestor worship. 9,000 to 7,000 years ago is sex and death rituals, many ancestors and fertility cult, over 100 phallic and vaginal shaped structures, as well as artifacts found. Ancient skull cult ritual and new violence from 8,029 to 7,640 years ago in Sweden, and showed rich relics of deliberate violence. 8,000 years ago probably connects to the first goddess, Cybele. This is a figure that from Çatalhöyük, and also in the same area later in central Turkey, about 3,200 to 2,700 years ago, is at the time the only known goddess. That it was basically a national deity. And the cult was later adopted by the Greeks, spreading from Turkey to the mainland Greece, and certainly were in the western colonies by as much as 2,600 years ago. This goddess, though, was found, I pictured her with the head, but this goddess was found actually with the head missing, like the skull cult, and the sitting next to two cats or lions, and also matches some of the sitting lion chairs from Egypt, throne stools. Fear of war and violence and the creation of the male god in the Balkans, somewhere around 7,250 to 6,500 years ago. Evidence here showing that using a stool, which is basically a birthing stool, and it was taken from the female, the seat of power. Then we see a whole bunch of from 7,500 to 4,750. We see, like I said, the stool of power, all these little figurines on stools, little chairs, birthing chairs. Then also this is the same time that there's the emergence of the yin and yang symbol. And they have sunshine temples for different times of the year. And 7,714,000 years old grave, a young boy in the red paint maritime archaic culture, the oldest burial mound in North America. Looks a lot like the dolmens, or a sort of a dolmen-kurgan mix. Interesting enough, these 7,714-year-old burial of this maritime arcane culture in Labrador, Canada, seems to be almost paralleled by right across the ocean. You have European megaliths that can trace back to a single hunter-gatherer culture that emerged at 7,000 years ago in Brittany, northwestern France, and then spread out into Europe from there. There's pictures of many types of megaliths, from kurgans to ziggurats to pyramids to mirths, trilithons, dolmens. And they all have a connected sort of a meaning to me. They're all representing ritual and burial and life and death and spiritual type of inclinations. The Varner culture, about 6,500 years ago, is a burial of a Proto king or a great clan leader. And he had more gold in his one grave than the entire world at that time. And there was several graves that were buried with just mud faces with gold jewelry on them and no actual body in the grave, possibly even hinting back to the skull cult, and also probably the emergence of the male god, which that figure was found with all the earring piercings Possibly also the holes could represent, once again, like the little dots of gold, represent like the stars and ancestors. And then the Glacial star from the Glacial culture, which the culture dated about 6,400 to 5,500. The star is probably about 6,000 years old. And it's very, very similar to the star of the goddess Iana, and also the star sun symbol of the god Ute. And this is the cuneiform, same pointed star for the 8-pointed star for deity star symbol in general. Stonehenge, paganistic burial and astrological ritual complex. This is the first emergence of Stonehenge 1. Stonehenge 1 is about 5,100 years ago, as long as, and then the second was 5,000. The third was 4,600 years ago, and then it's 4,600 to 4,400, and then 4,400 to 4,280, and so on. But also, I believe that this could be basically some form of also bird perches to relate to sky burial and the belief in birds carry souls to the afterlife. And these are symbolic drums that were designed that probably represented actual larger ones. The belief is they also were used possibly even to map out the stone circles. Progressive organized religion starts around 5,000 years ago. Religion began in wonder and ended with closed-mindedness. How odd it is that the earliest echoes of religion, seemingly they were at some point trying to honestly understand the world in a time before science. Yet since the earliest echoes of science, the desire for honesty to understand the world came into conflict with religious beliefs, and the battle for what people believed began. Again, the religion is an evolved product. Understanding the religion evolution, Animism, Africa around 100,000 years ago, Totemism in Europe about 50,000 years ago, Shamanism in Siberia and also the Czech Republic around 30,000 years ago, Paganism in Turkey around 12,000 years ago, progressed organized religion like that in Egypt 5,000 years ago. Timeline of religion. Hinduism is around 3,700 to 3,500 years ago. Judaism around 3,450 to 3,250,000 years ago. 50,000 years ago, years old. Jainism around 2,599 to 2,527 years old. Confucianism around 2,600 to 2,501 years old. Buddhism around 2,563 to 2,400 years old. Christianity around 2,000 years old. Shintoism around 1,305 years old. Islam around 1,407 to 1,385 years old. Sikhism is around 548 to 478 years old. And Baalism is around 200 to 125 years old. This is all part of my future book, and I'll expand on it, of course, but the Tree of Lies and its Hidden Roots, exposing the evolution of religion and removing the rationale of faith. Thank you.